Schiff, it is Wednesday, June 24th, 2009. First of all, we had the statement today that I talked about yesterday from the Fed. And once again, I think they walked that tightrope, and the Fed basically told the markets what the markets wanted to hear. They said that rates are going to remain at practically zero for an indefinite period of time, which is what the market wanted to hear. But I guess for concerns that there was too much debt monetization, the government or the Fed made no comment about a specific number or quantity of Treasury securities or other debt instruments that they were intending to buy. Now, apparently, the dollar rallied a little bit on that, although I think most of the dollar rally had to do with intervention overnight by the Swiss government, where the Swiss government intervened specifically to weaken the value of the Swiss franc. And I think that intervention led to a dollar rally, and the rally was most pronounced against European currencies like the Swiss franc and the euro. The dollar actually lost a little ground against the Australian dollar. But I think what the government is basically doing is they're basically saying we're going to supply massive amounts of inflation, but we're not going to monetize government debt. Well, that's impossible. The only way that the government is going to be able to keep interest rates really low is to buy government debt. Now, we got some cooperation from foreign central banks. We announced the results of the 5-year auction today, and 63% of the 5-year government bonds were bought by foreign central banks. Obviously, if those foreign central banks weren't there, the auction would have been a complete failure, and there would have been utter turmoil in the market. 63% is a huge percentage, meaning that if we're going to borrow $3 trillion over the next year, which is what we have to do. We have $1 trillion of debt rolling over and $2 trillion of new debt. If foreign central governments are going to buy 63% of that, that means that foreigners are going to have to lend us $2 trillion of the $3 trillion. I think they'd be completely foolish if they did that. And if they do it this year, how much are they going to have to lend us the following year? Another $3 trillion? If they do that for the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, we're going to owe the world an extra $10 trillion. I mean, this would be a massive burden on Americans for generations to come if we actually paid it off. Of course, we're not going to pay it off. We're going to repudiate it, either through default or inflation, which is one of the reasons that foreigners are going to stop lending us all this money. Anyway, also there was a lot of news today talk about the president's health care proposal. And I thought it was very interesting, but very good politics. Barack Obama basically defended the health care program by attacking the critics. And what he said is that his critics are saying that if the government creates insurance, that the private sector won't be able to compete with the government-provided insurance because they'll be able to offer better terms and better rates. And then Barack Obama is saying, well, wait a minute. If the Republicans are saying that the government can't do anything right, why are they so afraid that government health care is going to be so efficient that it's going to put all the private sector companies out of business? Well, that's a great straw man, but that's not the issue. The reason that private companies have to fear the government is not because it's efficient, but because it's inefficient and it's going to operate with a government subsidy. You see, the government insurance company is not going to have to make a profit. In fact, it can make huge losses, which means it doesn't have to price its insurance to reflect the actual risk of providing it. So it'll misprice the insurance. It can afford to offer better coverage because they don't have to worry about staying in business or being solvent because they're going to get the money they need from the government. Also, the government insurance company, unlike a private company, is not going to have to properly account for all the contingency liabilities, both of its investment accounts, which it won't even have, and of its employees that it hires and maybe promises health benefits or retirement benefits to, whereas private sector companies have to have honest books. In addition, the private sector is going to face taxes, whereas the government-provided plan won't have to operate with any kind of tax. But it's not that the government is going to be efficient at delivering health care. It's not. Even if the insurance is cheap, the taxpayer subsidy will be enormous, so that the total cost of government-provided health care will be much higher than the private sector, because it's going to be the cost or the price of buying the government health insurance plus the added subsidy that taxpayers have to make up or is going to be financed through inflation to pay for all the losses that the government health care system generates. That is the real problem. Also, in the news today, there was, the Citigroup is now going to be giving everybody raises. And of course, this is a company that would have been bankrupted had the government not bailed them out. Now, the public was objecting to all the bonuses. So they decided, well, we won't pay the bonuses, we'll just give everybody raises. And one of the reasons that they say they need to give raises is because if they didn't give their employees wages, they would quit and work someplace else where they can get more money. Well, of course, no one bothers to point out that the only reason they have the option of quitting and working someplace else is because the other companies where they could work are also getting government bailout money. If the government wasn't giving every Wall Street firm money, then Wall Street firms wouldn't be able to pay everybody all this money. And they wouldn't have, and other firms wouldn't have to worry about retaining their employees. Nobody would quit. Because where would they go? If it wasn't for all these government bailouts, Wall Street firms that were still in business could cut the salaries of their employees and not have to worry about anything. Because nobody would quit. So instead, we have one government problem creating another one. Because they give everybody money, now the Citigroup employees actually have the ability to quit unless they get raises. And of course, the raises are being paid for by the bailout money because they're not making any profits. And of course, what about the real perpetrators? Robert Rubin, for all his great reputation, he oversaw that company and he helped run it into the ground. Meanwhile, while he was sitting on Citi's board for the last 4 or 5 years, he collected over $100 million in compensation. Where are the lawsuits against Robert Rubin? Why isn't Robert Rubin having to give that money to the shareholders or to the government or somebody? But why should he get to keep all that money for running that company into the ground? Also, I happened to be watching on CNBC today, and David Faber, who's a reporter there, just came out with a book called "And Then the Roof Caved In." It's currently #1 on Amazon. It just came out for business or investments. And they're all praising him. Joe Kernan's on there. Fantastic book. Great book. Meanwhile, it's "And Then the Roof Caved In," not "The Roof's About to Cave In." He didn't write this book in 2005 and 2006 when it would have made a difference. He wrote it after the fact. And I haven't even read the book, and I'm not taking anything away from him. But the way they're falling all over him about how great this book is, meanwhile, none of them have ever said anything about my book, about Crash Proof, about the fact that there's probably nothing substantive in Faber's book that I didn't address back in 2004 or 2005 or 2006 on my website, in my speeches, in my books. Yet I never go on the shows and have people congratulating me for my foresight. Yet they're able to congratulate Faber for his hindsight. One of the things I'm sure that Faber didn't mention when he is properly pointing the finger at a lot of the culprits, but I'm sure he's giving his own network and the financial industry in general a pass, because I know that I was out there on CNBC with David Faber sitting in the room saying all this stuff, and he was just laughing it off like everybody else. In fact, for years, my commentaries that I put on my website on Europe Pacific Capital, I started emailing them out to reporters back in 2004, and every week I would write a commentary. And probably at least a dozen people at CNBC were on my list, on-air reporters and anchors, and I was sending them all my commentary, and I laid out the entire case for why there was a housing bubble, why it was going to collapse, what it was going to do to the economy, what it was going to do to the banking industry. I went over all the conflicts of interest between the mortgage lenders, the originators, Wall Street, securitization, the ratings agencies. I went over all of it, and I'm sure David Faber, among other people, were able to see all this information, yet they completely ignored it. They ignored it. They didn't want to write anything about it. They totally dismissed it, and now, of course, they're able to write these books after the fact, laying out the causes. Meanwhile, I mentioned before, I used to be on these financial shows pretty much several times a week. Some weeks I'd be on 3 or 4 times. CNN, CNBC, Fox, Bloomberg. Now I'm barely on. While I'm on the subject, I am going to be on Glenn Beck tomorrow night on Fox. It's at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on Fox News. But, I used to be on all the time. And they barely have me on now. And again, I think the reason is they want to pretend that nobody could have figured this out. That this was out of left field, a fluke, 100-year flood. Nobody could have predicted it. And therefore, they don't want to have the guy who actually predicted it on the air, especially when they don't like what I have to say, because as far as I'm concerned, the crisis isn't over. It's just beginning. That's it for today. That's all.